Welcome to Higher Ed Matters. I'm super excited to have Gretchen Borzillo with us this afternoon. She is VP of HR and Operations here at MediaCross. Welcome.
Thank you.
So briefly, tell us a little bit what brings you to MediaCross.
What brings it? Well, I guess what brought me 11 years ago.
Wow.
I've been here a long time. At that time, what initially brought me was moving to St. Louis and looking for an opportunity here where I really wanted to lay down roots. I'd say what's kept me here is the great people, the opportunity to do really great work, or at least be in the stands to see the work that our team does. And then I'm on the behind the scenes, being able to support our team that's doing really great work.
Sure. And it's such a critical role to give us the ability to be able to be free to do great work, right? Like it just is that structure. Well, of course, today I've asked you to kind of join us this afternoon because I want to talk a little bit about, we're seeing in both the business world and also on the college side as well. Now that the pandemic is pretty much kind of behind us, there's this question of remote working or, a flex schedule of both working from home, but we're also working from the office. And, obviously, we all know we lived through it together. We all transitioned to remote working in 2020. But there's been some, desires, I think, from CEOs, from college presidents, to go to 100% back full into the office. And we've seen some pushback from that. And so I'd love to hear kind of your take on, why do you think leadership is really pushing aggressively to have a full 100% back in the office?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends who the leader is and what their expectations are, right?
Sure.
And when you're looking at the workforce that we have now, we have 5 generations in the workforce. Yeah. So we've never had a time in history where we've had this many people, this many generations actively working in the workforce. When you think about retirement age, you have people working longer. So lots of dynamics there. So I think the generational perspective is one piece, depending who are the people that are in those leadership roles that are making the decisions.
Sure.
And then the second would be, what impact were they seeing from the remote work that's leading them to make those decisions? I have a handful of friends that love working fully remotely, and when they have been pushed to be back in office 100% or even say half of the time, they were really not happy about it. And I think for them in those situations, when they were asked to return, it wasn't really explained to them, you know? And speaking to the pushback, I think that's a big piece of it too. Like, what are we communicating? What is the why? And making sure that why resonates with our employee base.
You mentioned a variety of generations that are currently working. Do you find that there is a generational difference between the approach to remote working?
For sure. Yeah, you see a stark contrast between, say, someone who's a Gen Z versus a boomer, and what their perspective on work expectations, work hours, flexibility, all of that. I think it also goes into, you look at, well, how many years has said person been in the workforce? What expectations were laid out in terms of professionalism and work hours and all of that.
Sure. I think it's really interesting too. Something, I'm kind of in the middle probably of those generations that are in the workforce. And so it's interesting from my perspective, my parents and my grandparents stayed at companies for 30, 40 years. And that was just kind of seen as like the loyalty aspect of it, and how that has changed pretty drastically now, right? Like I remember when I was on a college campus, is that if you saw somebody who was jumping pretty regularly, it was a red flag, right? And now with the younger generation, I find that almost the red flag isn't necessarily there anymore. It's not necessarily a bad thing to experience different types of work environments or even professions. So.
Well, and I would say too, me being one place for 11 years is pretty rare nowadays. And so that's something that people are often shocked by, especially if I'm involved in our interview process and candidates ask me, how long have you been there? Whoa. I mean, I always get a really big response.
So having been here for 11 years, though, I think it was when you were kind of giving brief introductions, I thought it was really interesting. And I think it's a testament of why did you come to MediaCross, but then also why do you stay, right? And that's, I think, a big important piece to when you're in interviews or you're talking with folks about MediaCross and your role here. I think the why you stay is important. So obviously, I am a remote worker. I live just south of Charlotte. The intention has always been to work remote and to come into the office like we are today, which I love. But I had some real questions and concerns having come from a college campus to where I was on campus every day. It was right at the start of the pandemic, so we hadn't fully made the switch to remote yet. But I can remember when I was interviewing, is I had the questions of how do you build that rapport with teammates? How do you feel connected to a company that or an agency that I'm not physically in? Of course, now 3.5 years later, wildly successful. I thoroughly enjoy it. But that's intentional, I feel, in terms of the way that we approach remote working. So I'd love to hear, what are some of the things that you have in place or that you have created to ensure that it is a successful from both the employee kind of performance, but then also the employee satisfaction.
Yeah, for sure. I think it really goes to employee engagement. And so making sure you're being intentional about remembering that person's there, right? Like making sure they feel remembered and valued and recognized, and doing little things like we have our social coffee chats that are, I think, weekly or every other week, but that's a way that we can all connect virtually. And that was something that was born really within the pandemic, but it's something that has stayed on because our team has really enjoyed it. And whether they're working from home or they're in the office, everybody can connect.
Sure.
But I really just think it all boils down to being intentional in everything that you do, and being very clear with your expectations, and your communication about those things.
Which it's so funny that you say being intentional. Personally, I have found it's been in like items that you almost could think could be overlooked, but it's just I'll give you a perfect example. I don't remember what it was, but you were sending something out. I don't know if it was envelopes or whatever. And funny side story that you have chickens.
Yes.
And we hear of the stories of the chickens constantly, and they're great, and I love them. But it was something that, it was envelopes or something that I needed. And you'd stuck, I think, like a meme or something of chickens in there along with it, just with a little note. And how impactful that little thing was, right? Like it probably didn't cost you much more than a couple minutes to actually do. But the return on that was just, again, when you say feeling valued and a part of the team, it was those little moments that I think are really impactful and really special that you do that I think others could learn from.
Well, one of the things that I tend to say when I'm interviewing candidates and we talk about valuing and building relationships, which is one of our core values, is that in the digital age that we've been in and will continue to be in, it's tempting to become transactional with people. Forget that there's a person on the other side of your messaging system, other side of the email, your project management system, whatever, or your FedEx box. Like, it's a person that's receiving it, and that person has feelings, perceptions, opinions, all of those things. And so taking a moment to remember that, I think, makes a huge impact. And then too, like intentionality in the details, because details matter.
So for folks that they're getting pushback, maybe from their leadership, right? And they're trying to make a case for either remaining in a flexible environment, or maybe even expanding it slightly, right? Is there any information or anywhere they can turn to find arguments and things to help their case that they can still be successful both in a employee performance, but then also kind of the flip side again that your employees are happier and ultimately do better work?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about before, which is understanding the why. So having those transparent conversations. So I know this hasn't been brought up yet in our conversation, but MediaCross, we are also a federal contractor. And with that, our team members that work in support of that, a majority of them work fully on site. So under our umbrella, we have employees who are fully on site. We have fully remote employees, and then we have the hybrid model as well.
Of course.
And all of that is dependent on the specific job that they're doing, and really what we have control over as a business. So, for example, when you're in the federal contracting situation, there are certain pieces that we just don't have control over based on, established systems or facilities that our team members are working in. So then we look at, okay, well, what can we do within the confines of this to make this the best working environment and employee experience possible? So with somebody trying to make their case for why they should stay remote, well, it depends if it's a situation where they actually could stay remote,
Sure.
and being able to understand that. But like my friends who have gone through this, who didn't get any clear communication behind the why, and instead they're just enraged that something's just being taken from them that they felt was given, especially something that they enjoyed so much. And then if they did try to have the conversation, folks weren't open to it. Well, that's when you're just going to kind of hit a block and you're probably going to see some turnover as a result of that. So I think that it's kind of you've got to have, it's got to be you have to take a cooperative approach to determining what's really best for the person, the role that they're in, and the organization as a whole.
I think it's really interesting though, and I don't know if you even kind of are aware. But I love the fact that even for folks that are on our team, that the remote maybe isn't possible because of, I'm assuming like military contracts and systems and so forth, where like physical location really does matter, that you still open it up to say, if that's not possible, what can we do to make sure that, if it's just we're not able to do that. And I think that that's an interesting approach that a lot of people don't see, that so even if the answer is no,
Yeah.
but we're still going to try to do X, Y, and Z. I think again that goes to your testament of like really focusing on what matters to people, right? What they value and what they cherish. Because some folks it's going to be pay increase. Others it's like, no, give me one day at home if possible,
Yeah.
kind of situation. So, but what do you see in terms of like future for working and what that means for the office?
Sure. So I think there's been a lot of lessons learned from the pandemic, specifically the impact of fully remote work and how it can lead to a lot of loneliness. We've seen there's so many studies about the mental health impact of people being completely isolated. So going back to when you are completely remote, having that intentional connection, making sure you're getting those scheduled times to actually have that in person. Um, Connection too, because the energy that you feel when someone's in the room. So that would be one piece. I think the other is, so I believe what I was reading, John Hopkins did had an article out about really the impact and what we're expecting in terms of remote work in the coming years. And so by 2030, Gen Z will be 30% of the workforce. It's really not that far away because we're knocking on 2024's door.
No, it's happening so fast.
Right. And then if you look at where we're at now, millennials are almost 40%. Gen X is about 30, if I'm remembering right. And so when you're looking at, okay, the future of the workforce, what is it that they're really looking at and desiring in an employment experience? So, and a lot of that is the remote work and the flexibility. So that demand is here to stay. Well, also, when you're looking at how you're attracting employees and future employees, also with Gen Z, the amount of the opportunities for work. There's more diversity in their work opportunities. So I was watching The Voice because I'm a Reba fan and she's on there and they got me back, okay? Queen of Country, I want to watch it, okay? I think that's like millions of people at this point. I'm sure their ratings have gone up. But there was this young artist on there and she had recently graduated and she was explaining, I'm a dog walker, I'm a food delivery driver, and I'm a babysitter. And you also have on the business side, folks talking about where have all the workers gone? Well, there's far more opportunities now in terms of what you can do for work. The pandemic really opened that box in terms of all of the, the amount of convenience jobs there are now in terms of
Sure.
supporting people's desire for
Yeah.
convenience.
Mhm.
And so, and you see with Gen Z, like they're a little bit more fine with that.
Mhm.
They're not desiring the level of stability that say a boomer was.
Sure.
And so they're looking for different things.
Mhm.
And so if you're wanting to get talent and continue that pipeline, you are going to have to meet the demands
Mhm.
of the majority of workers.
Mhm.
I will say that's something I've learned definitely is like they are like the master of the side hustle.
Yes.
Like that's I don't think side hustle was a thing probably until maybe really I think I started hearing about it in like the pandemic, and it was the younger generation that was I find it funny because they almost get a bad rap in terms of like they don't want to work or that they're not showing up or whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah.
they're probably working 3 times harder than you were or that you are because they've got 3 side hustles.
Exactly. But they can do it all when they want to do it.
That's exactly it.
And so
Mhm.
that's also,
Mhm.
you know, and they're working very different hours,
Mhm.
but it provides a level of freedom that say the work opportunities of the past
Sure.
different.
Or it's I don't think that from what I've gathered and from what I've seen, the concept of like an 8 to 5 is a foreign not only a foreign concept to them, but it's not something that they want. That whole concept about putting in 8 hours, straight hours a day is something that they view as enjoyable. Even.
Yeah.
So
And really seeking to have breaks or time for
Mhm.
themselves,
Mhm.
you know, actually taking a lunch, you know, things like that, or going to walk their dog, or they're
Sure.
going to go to a gym class. And
Sure.
again, not every situation can support that.
Mhm.
So it really goes back to looking at, okay, what do we have control over,
Sure.
and how can we make this attractive to the people that we're trying to hire and
definitely.
retain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because that's probably one of the things that when your home becomes your home office, right? That was a big shift for me. Is that when I was on a college campus, I would work till 7 o'clock at night. But my policy personally was I don't take work home. Like that's where, I had established those boundaries for myself so I could have a decent work life, home life balance. But then when work is your home, right? Like your home is your home office and you don't have the separation. I think it's important to still create those boundaries. But at the same time, I found that being able to do laundry on a Tuesday, instead of waiting like during the day as I'm taking a meeting and that running in the background to where then when I'm off at 5, 6 o'clock at night, I don't have to worry about doing laundry, right? Like it has actually increased my home, like my work life balance and the fact that I'm not spending my weekends mowing the lawn, or I can truly invest in myself during that time or my family or whatever the situation may be. So, and I think that's part of one reason why people find the remote work or the flex schedules to be impactful. It's not, I don't think that they're working less or they're less productive or things of that nature. It's just you have the ability to kind of combine both worlds.
For sure, and I think there's another side to that coin
Mhm.
too. So when you're looking at the studies that they've done about the impact of remote work, for some, those lines being so blurred and not having that separation that you're talking about, where your break time in the office may be, oh, I'm going to fill up my water and have a chat for 10 minutes. Instead, I'm doing housework, to where you're really not getting any break throughout the day.
Sure.
And then that can lead to a lot of exhaustion. So I think on the employer side, you really have to look at, well, again, I'm all about like what can we control? But how can we create healthy structures and expectations for everyone, regardless if they're on site, hybrid, or remote? Because you have to have balance no matter what situation you're in.
Absolutely. And I think it's important too, is like kind of going back to the coffee chats that we have every Wednesday. It is, from my understanding, almost like not a strict policy, but it is intent that that's not to discuss work projects, right? Like often it's a part of who we are and work will kind of pop up every now and again, but it truly is intended to be 30 minutes in our day to where we're connecting with each other, we're learning about each other's lives, and really, again, building those relationships that ultimately help us to do better work, right? Like invest when we know each other and we're familiar with our styles and how we operate. It just allows us to communicate better at the end of the day and to collaborate better.
And to feel more comfortable approaching someone, or to be viewed as more approachable. And I think for me, I'm not in those a lot because a lot of times I have conflicting meetings, but I do try to be intentional to go in to remind people that, hey, like you can still come and talk to me. I'm a a person just like you, and don't feel like you can't come to me for things. And so I think that too, like being mindful of that approachability.
Absolutely, absolutely. For folks that maybe we talk a little bit about arming folks with information to be able to make the argument to stay remote. For folks that are considering, like, okay, how do we do this? If there are concerns about productivity, or that the work effort or whatever the case may be may decrease because of it, what have you found, or is there any suggestions or best practices to say this is how you kind of manage that?
In terms of the concern of someone working remotely and it being less productive, I would say it really depends on the person and going back to those clear expectations. Oftentimes, if you're working fully remote, I think it can be more tempting to work more and not have that balance because you don't have to hop in the car and get somewhere. You can squeeze in more minutes here and there, and it's a lot easier to jump back on to your computer in the middle of the night because you couldn't stop thinking about something. Whereas maybe if you're driving to work every day and you have that separation, it's a little easier to turn it off.
Sure. Yeah, I think that it's a good point when you're talking about like the commute, right? Like,
Great.
I'm very thankful for my current commute, which is literally from like the coffee pot to my office.
Yeah.
But that was an opportunity, when I go back to when I was commuting to my campus or whatever, is that really was time for me to be reflective. And the 30 minutes that I took to get to campus, I was thinking about what's my day structured like, what is on my plate, what do I have to accomplish, and then the end of the drive was literally just, okay, how was the day, right? Like, how did I get everything accomplished? No. But like, what else is still left on my plate? What can I address? But it gave me that time to kind of compress and decompress a little bit. And I have found that that's when your commute is literally walking from room to room, you don't necessarily get that compression time or that preparation time. So for folks that maybe are looking to continue that or whatever, is there something that they should be doing, right? Should you spend the first 20 minutes of your day drinking your coffee and thinking about what's to do, or like, how would you
So I'm
recommend?
very intentional on using my calendar to block off even time just for myself.
Mhm.
So if I need to prepare for something, if I need to, in terms of getting my mind right for now, I have a decent commute. So I have like a 35 to 45-minute commute every day. And I'm here a lot of days because I like being in the office, you know. So I would say being mindful about how they're structuring their day. And also say if you have someone that's concerned about how their remote employee is performing, making sure that you're having regular touch bases, going back to the expectations, but also holding them accountable to the deadlines that are set. If the person is meeting the demands of the job, meeting the deadlines, fulfilling your expectations, then at that point, where does the concern lie? And being able to have that conversation. I think sometimes it can be fear based, just kind of the unknown, what's going to happen, thinking the worst. But on the flip side, it could really turn out for the best. And again, it all depends on the position and really the person and the role and what drives them and how they work.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something I always used to say, even on a college campus, um, button seat doesn't matter. Like, button seat time doesn't matter to me. Obviously, I don't want to overflow your plates where you feel like you have to be in the office for 10 hours kind of situation. But if you're spectacular at your job and you're able to knock it out in 2 hours, and like you said, meet the deadlines, meet the expectations, and so forth, for me, it didn't matter if it took you 2 hours or 8 hours or whatever the case may be. It's that your performance and the expectations are being met. And that is something that I enjoy, I think, about this generation, is I think they do value less that time in seat and more kind of that project based aspect of it.
For sure. And I do in terms of the being in seat, like when you're in office and have that opportunity to connect personally, like there's a lot of power in that. But I do think, if you have the opportunity to be hybrid or remote, just having that healthy balance between the both.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Gretchen, for joining us this afternoon. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I really appreciate kind of your full spectrum of, it's not just a decision whether to be flex or remote or fully in office, is that we really have to look at the job responsibilities, the duties, the responsibilities, the structure of the office before really making a decision in any direction, right?
Right.
And understanding your values of your employees. It's not just a flex or no flex kind of situation. There's so much more that goes into, or so much more that should go into that conversation.
Definitely. Well, it's looking at how can we strategically meet the demands of the business
Okay.
while also appealing to um, current and current employees and potentially future employees, and also knowing as time goes on, what these future groups of employees are going to be looking for, and how can we continue to remain competitive.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.